Okay, we're live, and I hope that I don't regret doing this, but it is an honor, a privilege, and from a personal standpoint, it is awesome for me to have one of the iconic baseball owners, one of the iconic baseball players, one of the iconic managers. I get all three in two people, Joe Torre and Jerry Reinsdorf. I'm going to begin as I do with all of these. Uh, that several months ago, when I had a health issue, Jerry Reinsdorf calls me on the phone, and I'm so excited. It's the Chicago White Sox owner, and he's calling me, and I think it's going to be great. And all he does is yell at me because I'm negotiating with my doctors over how well I'm going to take care of myself. And I suddenly realized, after being embarrassed and angry, that it is a privilege to have the owner of the White Sox screaming at me while I'm driving through Iowa. So, Jerry, thank you so much for being here. And Joe, I was dumb enough to wait to the last possible moment you were at the mayor's house in New York City celebrating with the Yankees trophy for winning the World Series. And you're getting up, and I walk over, and I'm begging you. I waited too long to have this baseball conversation, and you sat down and you gave me 20 minutes. So for both of you, you're very special in my life. You're both the same generation. And I got to begin with a question that everybody is asking. Are we going to have baseball this year?
Well,
Either of you.
from
Go
my
ahead,
stand,
Jerry.
okay, I don't know. I'm certainly hopeful. I know that both sides have to keep talking. They're staking out their positions, and somewhere in the middle, I assume that there's going to be a deal. I certainly hope so.
Yeah, and my feeling, Frank, is I know I've been inundated. You don't get out much anymore, but when I, see people, the only question they want to ask me is, what about baseball? We're going to have baseball. And, I'm hopeful because I want it to happen. Um, and just the people crave it. What everybody says, we've got this to tweak baseball and we need to do that. But still, it's a part of everybody's life. And it would really be disappointing if we don't get the fans, even though they're going to be watching at a distance. It'd be really a shame if we don't give the fans some baseball this year.
And I'm curious, one more question about this. And I know that I don't want to put you guys in any jeopardy because the negotiations are very sensitive. Will you guys be able to attend a game? Joe as an advisor to Major League Baseball and Jerry as an owner? Will they let you guys into the stadiums if the games are played?
Why wouldn't they?
And will you go?
Of course I'll go. Of course I'll go.
Joe, will you go?
Frank, I'm addicted, man. I mean, baseball's been my life, and I understand why we have to play, in front of empty seats. But the game is still beautiful as far as I'm concerned, and I keep my fingers crossed that I get that chance.
So I'm going to show you something, how dedicated I am, not just to the game, but to you guys. Jerry, I just want you to see that this is your chair from courtside in 1996, because, of course, you're also the owner of the Bulls. And, Joe, I want you to see that this is your chair that was in the dugout. And, by the way, that's Vin Scully on the chair. So I'm hoping that there's some way, and I'll put my life on the line here, that I can go in your cars so I can see a game at some point in 2020. Joe, go ahead. Jerry, go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure that you'll be allowed to come in and see a game. There's a very, very strict protocol about who can be there and who can't be there. So I think you probably will be watching on television.
Well, I'm going to try to get you guys to help me out here.
Well, you could keep the car running, I guess, and wait for us later. But yeah, I think, with all that's gone on and that's still going on, similar to 9/11, with all the security we have. I think just the safety factor is going to take precedent over anything else right now. And especially this whole pandemic was, I guess started by one person. So it doesn't take much to have some bad things happen. We just hope that we can get through this and get a vaccine and get on the road to recovery.
By the way, what do we do with sound? This was a question that and you got a whole bunch of people watching you now. Do you pipe in the sound? Do you keep it quiet? What advice would you give to MLB because you know that there's going to be a massive audience watching the game? A silent game or a game that pipes in sound?
Well, there's certainly not going to be sound piped into the stadium. I think that would be silly. I don't know what the TV people are going to do. I hope they don't. We have some experience with a game like this because several years ago, the White Sox played a game in Baltimore with nobody in the stands, and there were no phony things done. They played the game, and there was no sound on television. It was what it was. Joe, you might even have been there.
No, but I remember the game because had some. Wasn't there were riots and stuff going on in town?
Exactly. Baltimore had some riots, and
right.
They called off the first two games of a series. We played the third game with nobody there, and I wasn't there, but I was told it was kind of eerie. Don Cooper, our pitching coach, said when he called the bullpen, he could hear it ring while he was in the dugout.
Yeah, it's again, it's baseball. I mean, the players certainly get motivated by the fans in the stands, one way or the other, either boo or cheer. But, baseball is baseball, and you're going to have to go out. I think we're all going to have to bite the bullet here this year on things we're used to seeing and used to having at our fingertips. But I think we realize we all have to pay a price for getting the game back. And, hopefully when it does come back, if it does come back, that we can go through to the World Series without any kind of interruption.
So what's the culture? Joe, you've had the experience of both New York and LA. What's the cultural difference between New York fans and LA fans?
It's a different passion. The chatter around LA was always, the people come late and they leave early. But the 3 years I managed there, of course, we were in the hunt, 2 of those 3 years, and it was pretty exciting. But they're pretty passionate. And the 1 year we drew more people than anybody else in baseball. I think it's a bad rap on the LA people. Like it's an event, they come, show up for a while, and then leave. But because I sensed a lot of passion. But when you get on the East Coast, and of course Chicago is a crazy town. I had the rivalry when I was managing the Cardinals with the Cubs and when I played for the Cardinals. But New York, and we get New York and Boston, it's really tough. And I'm a little biased because experience in it for 12 years was unlike anything I've ever seen as far as the passion. An interesting quick story to that. I remember when I managed the Dodgers, we went into Fenway to play a series, and I was warning the guys, they're going to get very personal. These fans, they're ruthless. They're going to get very personal. And I remember, Matt Kemp was dating Rihanna at the time. And I said, she was at the game. And I said, just understand, Maddie, that, somebody's going to yell something and they're all going to do. And all of a sudden the game goes by, nothing happened. And then I realized you had to have pinstripes on, or actually you have to have a Yankee uniform on for all that stuff to take place. So the Dodgers never experienced any kind of hooting and hollering in a negative way.
No, we have a story somewhat like that. When we played the Red Sox in I guess it was the first round of the playoffs in 2005, we expected them to be pretty rough, but they were very, very nice to us. And when we beat the Red Sox, everybody yelled at us, "Go beat the Yankees! Go beat the Yankees!" But we never had the chance.
So, who are the best fans I always thought that St. Louis, and Joe, you played there, that they knew the most, that that was a baseball town. Is that unfair?
I'm not sure if they knew the most. It was certainly, and Cincinnati, I think, before the work stoppage was on a par with them. You know, it was an event. I mean, you go into St. Louis, uh, you know, for a series, and you walk around downtown. Everybody's wearing red. Everybody's killing time before they go to the ballpark. It was the thing to do in town. Uh, but again, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough for me to, you know, to pick, even though St. Louis was special. And if you play for the Cardinals, even if you played for a short period of time, you'll always be looked at as royalty, which is really special, and it's still very special when I go there. But the craziness in New York and the craziness in Boston, you know, I know it's much different. You know, New York's so much bigger, but the those ballparks are nuts, really. I mean, uh, Terry Francona, it was either he was going to call me or I was going to call him after we finished the series. He said, "Well, I'm glad this stuff is over for 6 weeks because it drives you nuts. Every game was like World War III, you know, and it was something that really wore you out."
And how hard is it to be an owner of a team in a city that's got two teams? White Sox, Cubs, one part of the city goes and watches the Cubs, another part watches the White Sox. Is that a challenge for you during baseball season, Jerry?
No, I don't think the fact that there are two teams is a challenge in the way you describe it. It's a business challenge because we're taking a market and dividing it with somebody else. And I look at, you know, basketball, where the Bulls are the only team in town, so we only compete against ourselves. Whereas when you have two teams, you're actually competing against the other one from a business standpoint. But as far as from a pure baseball standpoint, we have our fans, they have their fans. Our fans hate their fans. Their fans hate our fans.
Okay, I've always wondered this, and either of you can go first. Which is a better game to you? Which do you enjoy more? A 1-0 pitcher's duel or an 11-10 kind of home run extravaganza? Which game do you like better?
Well, I don't like either one better. I think they're both great. They're both tense. I remember watching the Phillies beat the Cubs 23-22, and that was a great game. And I've seen a lot of 1-0 games that were great games. What I don't like is a low scoring game that takes 3.5 hours to play. I think low scoring games should get over faster. But other than that, they're both beautiful baseball. And usually a 1-0 game is going to have some great fielding plays as well as some great pitching. So to my mind, they're both great.
I'll tell you, both times, Frank, whether it's a high scoring game or a 1-0 game, you keep looking at the scoreboard and the innings don't seem to move. You're waiting. You know, that one game that comes to mind for me, it was a 1-0 game. Actually, we won two of them, one in the World Series against the Braves in '96. And then, of course, in '01, we're down 2-0 to Oakland in the division series, and the Jeter flip play with Mike Messina pitching a gem, we beat them 1-0 in Oakland, where they hadn't lost in a month. But you know, when you have one of those high scoring games, the first thing you look at as a manager, and I'm sure an owner, you're checking the list of pitchers that can pitch, because you're not sure you're going to be able to have enough of them. And that's the scary part, is to be able to get some length out of somebody.
You know, very often there'll be a whole bunch of runs scored early on. You know, the game will be 9-8 in the third or fourth inning. You say, boy, I don't know how many runs will be scored today. And then all of a sudden, both teams stop scoring, and you get great pitching and a tight game to the end. So, you know, this game is so unpredictable. You're liable to see anything on any given day when you go to a ball game.
You know, Frank, let me give you a game. Talk about high scoring. We went into. I was managing the Cardinals, and we went into to Denver, and I had a pitching staff at the time that couldn't strike anybody out and couldn't throw ground balls. And
That's pretty good in Denver.
And that is not a good remedy. I mean, not a good formula for trying to win games against the Galarragas and the Castillos and all those guys, and Bichette. So we lose all the games in Denver. So we go into Houston, and it's a Monday night, and it's my birthday, and I don't remember ever having a real good game on my birthday. So now we're up 9-0 in about the third inning, and Todd Zeal comes over to me and says, "Well, you're finally going to win on your birthday." I said, "Shut up. Let's wait and see what happened." Then it's 11-0, and we wind up losing 15-12 in that game. I was tied. It was tied by the fifth inning, which is really frightening. But those where you score a lot of runs, and of course, in Chicago when the wind's blowing out, no holds barred there, because it's a matter of being the home team is usually the favorite, because the team that scores last usually wins.
Are you guys superstitious? Like, I've learned never to project anything, and I'm going to tell you a story in a moment. But do you guys take it seriously, or are you guys more rational when you look at things like predicting a win or predicting doing well at the end of the season?
Well, I can tell you a story. When I was a teenager growing up in Brooklyn, and I was an ardent Dodger fan. I lived and died for the Dodgers.
Really?
Yeah. I know you were a Giant fan, which was disgusting in Brooklyn. But on October the 3rd, 1951, as the bottom of the ninth inning started, the Dodgers were up 4-1. My mother called me from the grocery store saying she was on her way home, and I made the mistake of saying, "By the time you get home, the Dodgers will be champions again." I have never, ever since then counted a game won until there were 27 outs.
I'll tell you a little thing that goes on, especially on the road, Frank. You have a lead in the ninth inning, and you need, obviously, the last 3 outs are the toughest ones to get. And all of a sudden, the bat boy will come out and start putting the bats away. Well, I'll tell you what, we've scared more than a few bat boys, because they're just trying to get a head start on what they are expecting to have happen. And boy, there's been a lot of screaming in that ninth inning, trying to make sure that nobody touch a thing. And I guess if there's a superstition, as Yogi continues to haunt me, the game's, it's not over till it's over.
So, Joe, you're going to be mad. I don't even know if I've told you this story. And Jerry, I know I haven't told you. And I now try to acknowledge a mistake on these interviews, because all these announcers like to show off like they really know what's going on. And I try to take the other side, a little bit of humility. Joe, I was there in the last game of the 2001 World Series, and I'm not going to look at the camera. I'm going to look at you. And Rudy Giuliani had brought me down to stand next to him for the last 3 outs. And I look over to him, and Jerry, you're never going to invite me to an owner's box again. And I said to Rudy, "What are you going to do about the parade? You can't have it down on Wall Street because of what had just happened." And Rudy says to me, "Oh, I didn't think of that before. I need to call the Macy's people. And he yells to the security guy, "We got to talk about Fifth Avenue. We will do it on the Macy's Day Parade." And I got to tell you, you've got the greatest reliever of all time, and it just comes apart. And Rudy not only would not talk to me, but he looks at me and says, "Get away from me. Find your own way home." And the security people, and he was pissed at me for months. And the security people said, "We got to take you separately." I had driven to the game with the mayor. They took me back. They put me on the plane with a blanket over me. And they said to me, "Do not move for the next 4 hours. because he will throw you off the plane if he sees you. So, Joe, I'm sorry. Jerry, I learned my lesson. What the hell happened? And Joe, how are you reacting? I mean, this was a Cinderella finish. The gods were smiling. You won playoff games that you weren't supposed to win. You got in the World Series you weren't supposed to. You came back again and again. What's going through your head and your heart in that last half inning?
Well, first off, I remember Don Zimmer asked me, because we were going into the bottom of the eighth inning, and I had a pinch hit from my pitcher in the top half of the eighth, and the score was tied. He says, "Who are you bringing in?" I said, "Mendoza." It was a tie game, and he says, "What about Mo? Rivera?" And I said, "Well, we're on the road." I said, "I want to get a lead," and I said, "The only way I'll bring in Mo," I said, "is if Sori hits up." And I no sooner said that and pointed, and Soriano hit a home run off Schilling, and now we're ahead. So that home run kept me from making probably the biggest mistake of my life. Not that Mendoza wasn't good, but the one thing I learned that night was that you don't want to lose a game, and your best pitcher never got in there. So, but Mariano in the ninth inning gives up the base hit to Mark Grace, and then the bunting stuff started, and of course he throws the ball in the center field, and I remember going out first and second, and I went out and I just said, "Let's get an out," because I had enough confidence in Mariano that let's get an out. Let's not try to get too fancy. But Mariano, he's so aggressive. And there was another bunt. He gets off the mound and goes right to third base. And I don't know if Scott Brocious was just, remembered what I said as far as just getting out, because he took the throw and stepped off the bag. And meanwhile, the one who bunted, I think it was Jay Bell, he was only halfway to first base. And he just never looked, and he was always really good at that. So that's not a good sign when something like that happens. But we lose. But you're right. I mean, what you started this question by saying how many times we've come back, and you realize how fortunate you have to have a little luck in this game, and it's and again, when your closer's on the mound, you pretty much put your hands in your pocket. There's not a whole lot to want to do, and it just wasn't supposed to happen.
And Jerry, I'm going to take the other side for you. You've won a World Series. Of course, we've just been watching the Bulls on television for the last 10 hours. There's a phrase that Jackie Gleason, I think you both remember him, and he's both, I assume that you would have enjoyed him. How sweet it is. Jerry, which is sweeter? The Bulls winning the NBA championship or the White Sox winning the World Series?
Well, I'm a baseball guy. I've always been a baseball guy. I loved, obviously, winning 6 championships. But the difference between basketball and baseball is the impact that it had on the community. Every time the Bulls won a championship, we had a rally in Grant Park, and there were 400,000 people there, and they were phenomenally happy. But when the White Sox won a World Series, we had a parade. We had 2 million people on the parade route. There wasn't one incident. I had people coming up to me all winter long, women crying, telling me how happy they were. One fella stopped me in the parking lot the next spring and said, "My father died 15 minutes after the last out. He knew, and he died happy." Well, only baseball has that impact. I mean, basketball is wonderful. It's a wonderful sport. It's great. The athletes are fantastic. But baseball, to many, many people, is actually a religion.
And Joe, how sweet it is. Which is sweeter? The success you had as a player or the success you had as a manager?
Not even close, Frank, as a manager. I mean, anything you accomplish as a team is so meaningful. I go back to my childhood when I used to go to my friend's basement. We used to roll the dice and play a whole season of APBA baseball, and and now you're doing it with real people, and it's it's a challenge. Managing is very difficult because you always have to be available for whoever wants some of your time. But it's so satisfying when everybody plays in concert, and I don't care what sport you have. I mean, every time they interview, someone after they win a championship, it's all about their teammates, which I really cherish. And I know Michael Jordan, talked about players will win games, but teams win championships, and that certainly couldn't be truer. It was so meaningful this time I had with the Yankees because it realized all my baseball dreams.
Is the first one the best?
First one was the best, only because it was the first one, and the fact that I guess we were underdogs. We weren't, we lost the first two games of the World Series, but we weren't, really supposed to be, win our division that year. And I had a group, and nobody was exceptional, but everybody did something during the course of that year that was meaningful. And of course, Derek Jeter seemed to be the glue that tied everybody together. It was by August of his rookie year, the veterans were waiting for him and expecting him to do something special, and he didn't disappoint.
Jerry, we've been watching you, and the timeliness of this interview is really wonderful. I just want to ask you two questions about basketball, and I promise to keep it just to two. The first one is Michael Jordan. The idea he suggested at the end that you guys could have come back, that the team could have returned, and it could have repeated again. And I'm not sure, and I'm curious from you if you agree or disagree.
Well, Michael's memory is bad. What Michael forgets is that when we won that last championship, he had to carry this team more than he ever had to carry them. And when the season was over, he said to me, I don't know if we can do it again. But then Phil said he wouldn't coach the team the next year. Now there was a lockout. That lasted, 2 or 3 months. And I said to Michael, let's not even make a decision on what we're going to do until we find out if Phil's going to come back, because Michael said he wouldn't play for anybody other than Phil. Well, before the end of the lockout, Michael was screwing around with a cigar cutter, and he cut his finger, and he had to have surgery. When the lockout was over, two things. One is that Phil said he wasn't coming back, and two, Michael could not have played because of the injury to the finger. So the whole thing became moot, whether you bring anybody back or you don't bring them back, because without Phil and without Michael, we weren't going to win anyway.
And one more from the show, which is Jerry Krause did not come across well. And do you think it was a fair portrayal of him? This is a Robert Wool question, so don't yell at me, yell at him. But Krause does not come across well.
Well, it's a fair question. Jerry Krause was a brilliant basketball strategist, general manager. He's a really good person, a really kind person, but he had sometimes of annoying people, and he would sometimes say the wrong thing, and so when he made the comment that Phil's not coming back, even if he's 82-0. He shouldn't have said it, because it sounded like he was firing Phil, when in reality, when Phil signed his contract for the last year, he's the one that said he wasn't going to come back. And Krause did an incredible job with these teams. We obviously inherited Michael Jordan, but it took 6 full seasons, in order to get a team around him that won a championship. And then after the first 3, Michael went to baseball, where I think he did incredibly well under the circumstances. But when Michael came back, on the next 3 championship teams, only Pippen remained from the first one, Pippen and Michael. So Krause put the team together in the first place, and then turned it over completely for the next 3 championships. So Krause did a phenomenal job. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame where he is. The fact is that he annoyed the media a lot, because he didn't like the media, and they knew it, and they didn't like him, and there was always a war. But as a basketball man, he was brilliant.
Joe, there was a period with New York that you the press liked you for most of your time there, but there was a period when you endured some second guessing. Do you have the ability, or did you have the ability to completely shut it out? Or, because I know that when I do politics, it still bothers me to this day. As manager in New York, could you ignore the criticism?
Now, the criticism, you mean media-wise?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to New York, the one thing I really said to myself, basically, I'm not going to listen to any of the radio shows or read any of the papers. However, when I talked to my two sisters, they always let me know it was in the paper because they'd say, Joey, you okay? But yeah, I didn't want to, first off, I didn't want to know how smart I was. I didn't want to know how dumb I was. When I walked into that clubhouse every day, I wanted to, I didn't want anything influencing me other than needing to win that ball game. But I really stayed away from that. I used to do a weekly show with, on the Fan with Mad Dog and Mike. And, when I was on this one week, they said, well, did you listen to such and such yesterday? I said, I don't listen to your radio station. I said, I do a show once a week, but I do not listen because it's not because I don't think anybody likes criticism. There's a certain sensitivity to playing this game, but you have to understand also, and I try to do that, is the fact that people are entitled to feel the way they do, and I, as you say, the press, were fair to me because I gave them a lot of time. I gave them a lot of time. I never shut anybody out in that regard.
Jerry, have you been treated fairly in Chicago?
Jerry's freezing on us.
You froze.
Yeah, I sometimes have been treated fairly, sometimes I have not. And like Joe, you just have to ignore it. You can't let the media influence how you make decisions.
So I did my research and I bought the book, Joe. I just want you to see that. Yes, I got it on sale, but only 20% off. You work for the toughest owner, not just in baseball, but maybe the toughest owner in all of sports. And you found a way to survive. And this is a guy who'd been through 4 managers in 4 years, and you actually survived him. What did you do? What was the secret? And you can't say that you didn't listen because you had to. He was loud. And if you didn't listen to him in private, he was the guy who spoke in public. How did you make it through?
This was, my bonus job. I mean, I played for 3 teams. I managed those 3 teams. I got fired by those 3 teams. And I had an opportunity to manage the Yankees. I had known George a little bit socially because I managed the Mets. He was the owner of the Yankees, and we'd always find ourselves at function. He would help me get Super Bowl tickets. But as Jerry can tell you, there's one thing being a friend of George's, another one working for him. But the one thing, in all fairness, I got George on the back 9. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't the same person when Billy was there and stuff like that because he had gotten a little older. But I don't know. I went in with such an attitude of well, first off, I felt my job baseball wise was to insulate my players from, and George was going to talk, he was going to criticize, he was going to do a lot of things. It was my job to keep that really from affecting my team. And we were successful there. I had a lot of grown-ups in that clubhouse. But, little things I do with George, like if we lose 3 or 4 in a row, and I don't know if you know this, Jerry, I used to call him up. I said, George, what am I doing wrong? And he was stuck for an answer, man. He used to, and I, he said, "Oh, you'll be all right," because I caught him by surprise. And I don't know. I mean, I was never afraid of George, and I think he may have sensed that. And he liked to rule. There's no question. He had a football mentality. And there's one story that has been out there, but when I was recovering from prostate cancer, I was watching a game, and I'll tell you, if anything will get you better, is sitting there with George watching a game, and you want to get back on the field. But it was a Sunday. We were playing Seattle, and we were ugly. We were really an ugly game, and George calls downstairs. He wants everybody up in his office. Now, when I say everybody, no players, just all the staff and coaches and trainers and everybody. In George's office, his desk was a round table, and George would always sit in his spot, and I would sit next to him. I felt I could diffuse. Don't ask me why. It was just a comfort I had with him. And Zimmer was either next to me or one over from me, and then guys were in couches out around the room. And he starts the meeting and says, "If anybody in here thinks they're doing the best they can, you can leave now." Well, Zimmer got up and left. He left the room, and George's veins were popping out of his neck. And I said, "George, I don't think you meant to say it that way." And I said, "I think you meant to say, if anybody in here doesn't think we can do better, you can leave now." He's doing the best he can, and because he was the interim manager, and it didn't sell to George, but George, he had that mentality. If a player didn't do well, he wanted you to talk bad about him in the paper, but Mel Stoudemire wasn't going to do it about his pitchers, and I wasn't going to do it about my players. And that was just the way it was. And if he wanted to, make an issue of it, so be it. But I wasn't going to change who I was. And I thought we got along fine, even right to the end. When I left that club after the 2007 season, I went to him first, and I thanked him for every opportunity he gave me. And he was emotional. I was emotional, but it was the greatest time of my life.
Jerry, did you have any trouble with a manager that said things that they should not have said in the press? A player's giving you a hard time, and how would you handle it? Because that very often an owner does not have the support of the fans.
Well, there's no question that the owners tend not to be incredibly popular among fans unless they win every year. But that's irrelevant. People don't come to games to watch owners. We're really not all that important. And the owner, if the owner is doing a really good job, he really isn't doing very much from a baseball standpoint or a basketball standpoint. What he does is he hires really good people to do their jobs and lets them do their jobs.
So you've never really had a conflict with the management, with the coaches, or with a player that was just mad that you weren't paying them enough?
Well, I had a conflict, obviously, with Scottie Pippen when I wouldn't renegotiate his contract, but it wasn't bad. The media made it to be out, worse than it was. Scottie just came to me and said he'd like to renegotiate the contract, and I reminded him that he promised when he signed the contract never to come back and try to change it. And he said, "Well, but I didn't realize I was going to be as good as I turned out to be." And and I said to him, "Do you own a home?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Do you have fire insurance?" He said, "Yes." I said, "At the end of the year, if the house doesn't burn down, do they give you back, the insurance company give you back the premium? You bought fire insurance." And that's as far as it got. I've never had a really bad time with a player that I can think of.
And I promise I won't go back again. Do you feel that the documentary was fair to you when you're watching it? Did you get, you must have gotten at least annoyed a couple times, but overall you felt it was fair to you?
Well, I got annoyed because of the picking on Krause when here's a man who's not alive and can't defend himself. But they did take care of that with Scottie Pippen at the end, saying he's the greatest general manager, in the history of basketball. So I thought that was good. I had no problems with me, except that they left out the part about Michael Jordan cutting his finger and not being able to play that seventh season. I wish that had gotten in, because that changes the whole narrative about that following year.
Joe, what's the responsibility of your local announcers, the guys who cover every game on radio, on television? They can get on a player, they can challenge a manager, they can second guess decisions that are made. Should they do that, or should they? How should local announcers behave?
Well, I like the announcers to try to, appreciate the visiting team, instead of only talking about, how good the home team is and stuff. But the one thing that I find that I resent is telling, and again, we're all going to second guess the manager. That's all well and good. I mean, that job, that's part of your job going in. But when you say as an announcer about decisions or these things should happen, these people don't know everything that's going on in that dugout that managers know. And I think that's unfair in a lot of ways. Manager, it's not like he makes a wrong move. He may make a move that didn't work, but it may not be a wrong move. You could have the best hitter in baseball pinch hit with the bases loaded, and he could strike out or hit into a double play, but it doesn't mean it was the wrong move. It's just something that didn't work. So I'm a little resentful, and probably because I did the job for almost 30 years is telling people what the manager should do or shouldn't have done.
I'm going to bring him over. This is kind of hokey, but this is Vin Scully, and you played while he was broadcasting for 3 years. Is he the best announcer of our lifetime?
There's no question. I grew up with him. Even though I wasn't a Dodger fan, I still enjoyed Vin in Brooklyn. And but for some reason, Vin and I, we had this friendship. When I was a visiting player, he would search me out, I would search him out, and don't ask me why. It was just something that we hit off. We'd tell each other a corny joke or whatever. He is without a doubt the best broadcaster. That magic comes out of his mouth when he would do the games. And the best part about it is when you know him, you realize that he lives up to being that individual too. A man who's very fair, really embraces the love of the game, and he paints you a heck of a picture.
Jerry, I'm not going to ask you the best broadcaster. Who is your idol when you were growing up? The player that you most wanted to meet, the player that you most got excited when they either came up to bat or came up to pitch?
My favorite player was Pee Wee Reese. He was because I always liked leaders, and Pee Wee was the captain of the Dodgers. He was the leader. He was the guy who as a 27-year-old kid from Louisville, Kentucky, put his arm around Jackie Robinson, and Jackie wrote a couple of books, and both of which he says he couldn't have made it without Pee Wee. But sometimes you have idols, but you've never met the idol, and then when you meet him, you're so disappointed. Well, I was very good friends with Joe Black, and who lived out here in Arizona, where I spend the winters. And one time we were at lunch, I got up my courage to say to Joe, "Tell me about Pee Wee." And I held my breath because I was afraid he was going to say something bad. And he said, "Pee Wee was our captain. He was our leader. he was the guy we went to when we had problems on the field or off the field. So it really made me feel wonderful because Pee Wee always was my favorite player. I only met him once at the winter meetings in Honolulu in 1982. I was with Bowie Kuhn's wife, Louisa, and the elevator opened up, and we get on, and there's Pee Wee Reese. And Louisa introduced me to him. Now, I, at that point, own a Major League Baseball team, and I couldn't talk. And I tried, I was like Jackie Gleason. I was so in awe of Pee Wee. And I felt like such a fool. But that's how I felt about Pee Wee Reese. And the more I know about him, the more I know that I picked the right guy to have as an idol.
And Joe, because you prioritize being a manager, who's the manager? And you don't have to go back. You can do it now or you can do it in your childhood, whichever. What manager do you most look up to?
Well, probably the one I learned the most from. I grew up, watching all the managers, the Dodger managers, Chuck Dressen, and I wind up playing for Chuck my first year in the big leagues. But the manager that I got the most from, as far as I was concerned, was Red Schoendienst. Red trusted his players. He let the players play, and he may not have been the greatest strategist, but as far as delegating authority and trusting the players, I think I learned a lot from him, and I really admired how he went about doing his job.
Both of you, the role of statistics has become significant. And there are computers that are either behind the dugout or somewhere in the stadium. And we have now moved into Moneyball, not just for choosing players, but even for decisions that managers are supposed to do. From an owner's perspective, do you believe in it? From a manager's perspective, has it gone too far? Guys?
Can a computer look into a player's eyes? Can the computer tell what's in a player's heart? What's he thinking? How hard is he breathing? The computers give us all sorts of information, but it's only tools. Only the manager who's in the dugout, only the guy who's in the trenches with the soldiers knows really what to expect of them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm not a fan. They may say that wasn't supposed to happen. Look what this the analytics say, but that's what our game is all about. I mean, our game, the home run in the 9th inning of the World Series with the Cubs and Cleveland, somebody who was the 25th guy on the team hits a home run to tie the game. I mean, stuff like this happens. And, I think the analytics are taking a lot away from the respect that the managers should be getting from the players during the course of the game.
Yeah, and the analytics also deal with averages. Let me give you an example. Let's say there's a man on second base and nobody out. Question is, do you bunt? Do you bunt the guy to third, or do you let the batter hit away? Well, the computer can tell you that there's a slight difference statistically whether one of those makes sense. I don't know which it is, but the computer doesn't know who's coming up next. So that changes everything. The computer can't replace the manager.
And there's one thing that when you talk to people who believe in all the analytics, and they say an out's an out.
Well, that's nonsense.
A strikeout is the same as a ground out. Try telling that to a manager with a man at second and nobody out, or a man at third and less than 2 out. That's crazy. That really is crazy. I mean, right now, I would love to see our game be more about action on the field. Cut down on the strikeouts, make more contact, give a little more to look at and a little more strategy in the game. But for sure, analytics, our game is, and I'm not sure it works for any game because, as Jerry pointed out, sometimes in the second inning and the eighth inning situation may be the same, but you're looking into that guy's eyes that you're going to ask to send up to the plate, and there's something you see that is you can't get that by looking through numbers.
So I'm speaking of numbers. Jay Rothman from ESPN has a question, and I really don't know what you're going to say. Bonds, Sosa, McGuire, should they be in the Hall of Fame?
Who are you asking?
Both of you.
I say no. I say
Because?
no.
Because?
Well, because obviously they would not have achieved the performance levels that they achieved if they had played the game honestly and had not taken performance enhancing substances. And I love Mark McGuire. I think he's a great guy, but I just don't see it. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to the people who are on the cusp of getting in, but don't get in. Even they played the game honestly. Had they taken steroids, they would have had better performance.
Joe?
I think the sad one for me is Barry Bonds. He won 4 MVPs before, I guess he, back in '98 when Sosa was getting all the attention and McGuire was getting all the attention, he knew that he was better than both of them. And unfortunately, I think it cost him the Hall of Fame just by doing what he did. But to me, he was so much the better player. And he established himself long before there was question on what he was doing. But those years after that, when he was scarier than Babe Ruth, man. I mean, you'd walk him with the bases loaded when he was doing whatever he was doing. But I think that's sad because he was the type of player that you certainly would pay your money to go watch.
Well, we are coming up to an hour, and I've just got 2 more questions for you, and I'll take one more from the people who are listening in. What about Pete Rose? Clearly, he had the numbers. Clearly, he played the game incredibly hard. What do you do with him now?
There's a sign in every clubhouse about gambling. He violated the cardinal rule of baseball, betting on teams, and then he lied about it. I mean, he was a great player. But he never came clean. And but if he were to be reinstated, which Rob Manfred could reinstate him, that wouldn't be an automatic election to the Hall of Fame. He would then have to go before the Veterans Committee, and there's no way that Veterans Committee would elect Pete to the Hall of Fame because he just wouldn't get in. So I think it's a moot question. But he did violate the most important rule in baseball.
Yeah, that rule that Jerry's referring to, they read it every spring to the players. They read it, and then it's posted. I mean, a big posting. It's not like a sheet of paper. It's a big chart that talks about gambling. And and then you hear people say, well, he never bet on his team to lose. But what happens when he never bet on his team? I mean, that's he was telling you something there. And what really, my wife's from Cincinnati, and she has 9 brothers and 6 sisters.
Wow.
And they're all Cincinnati Red fans and Pete Rose fans. Don't think I had to fight a few battles there. But the thing that bothered me when Jerry again said, he lied about it. These people were just swearing up and down he didn't do anything. Look, Pete said he didn't do anything. And then he didn't admit it until he wrote a book and never once apologized to the people of Cincinnati, which I thought was god awful.
Both of you love baseball. I mean, you love it. It's part of your life. It's who you are, and it's been that way for decades. If you were to bring about one change, and baseball's been talking about it now, obviously football's got higher ratings. You walk through a baseball stadium, and there are young people, but not as many as you probably would like. The sport itself has discussed it. What one change would you bring to the game that you think would have the biggest impact on the fans?
Well, I don't know.
I really don't know. I mean, for years I've been, complaining about equal rosters in September. I think that's so unfair, and I think we're doing it when we get the game started again. But I thought that was really the most unfair thing that was going on. Teams trying to, win a division and get to the postseason, and you have the other team with 40 players, and you have 29. It's not fair. As far as changes in the game, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see more contact. I'd like to incentivize team play more so than you hit home runs. You go and you get evaluated. I think there should be more value to doing things to help your team win. And I think a big part of this lack of team is you have young players, amateurs, travel all week, and they go to place, and they look around. They're playing with perfect strangers, so they're auditioning. I'm not sure we're doing them any favors, other than showing their wares. But the team concept, and I don't care what sport you play, is so important, and it means so much to, I think, the fans, that I'd like to see us head back that way.
And Jerry, there's no shortening of the game methodology that you. And again, I don't want to put you in an awkward situation, and I know that the league has been debating it, but I know you don't. Go ahead.
Well,
No, go ahead.
I don't see anything major. There are little tweaks that you could make. I mean, we already have a rule that says the batter's not supposed to step out of the batter's box between pitchers. Well, we ought to enforce that rule. But I don't think length of the game is as important as pace of the game. I think that's the most important thing. So if there are things that we can do not to let the game drag, when we bring in people from the bullpen, maybe we should go back to the days we put them in carts and we brought them in faster. We got them in faster. I think we could shorten the time between innings. I think now there's 2 minutes and 5 seconds, which is 125 seconds. And I know in our game we have 90 seconds of commercials. So, why do we need that extra time between innings or pitching changes? I think we could do that. But I think the most important thing that we can do to make baseball more popular is make sure that the kids are playing baseball. Make sure that young people are playing baseball and get the ball games before they're 7 or 8 years old. Because we know from research that if you get kids to go to a game at the age of 10 or under, you got them hooked. After that, they're not as likely to be fans of the game.
Yeah, if kids play baseball, then, because there's so many intricacies to our game that I think that's what makes a fan, when they understand the importance of the game. But I want to see more action, Frank. I really do. I want the pitchers to pitch to contact. We don't do that. We want to strike everybody out. We go back to Game 7 of the World Series, the Yankees in Pittsburgh in 1960. It was, I think it was 10-9 or 11-10 or some crazy thing like that. I remember watching it on television. It was 2 hours and 30 minutes. And you know what stat really stunned me when I looked at it? No strikeouts in the game. And the pitch to contact. That'll make action happen on the field. Maybe just take those speed guns out of the ballparks. Everybody's concerned about how hard they throw.
Yeah, things run in cycles, though. Baseball, it seems to run in cycles. There was a time when stolen bases were important. Then they weren't important. Then they came back again. I think right now there's all this emphasis on the so-called launch angle. Everybody's trying to hit the ball up in the air, and that's producing the strikeouts. I think eventually people will realize that strikeouts are bad. That 220 hitters who hit 40 home runs don't get paid that much, and they'll be trying to to make contact. I don't know how a pitcher today pitches the contact, because the batters are all swinging up, and they make it. It's either a home run or a swing and a miss.
Well, Joe, I have that microphone. from 1960 that called that game. I would show it to you. It's upstairs. And I think it's so great that you mentioned it. Final question for both you guys, and a personal question. Do you love to win more, or do you hate to lose more?
Yeah, would love to win. I used to ask Gibson that question. You love to win or you hate to lose? It was tough to tell. But I know, you just winning feels so good. Winning feels so good. And you know why it feels so good, Frank? Is because you were so close to losing. And it's always walking that tightrope, and just being, because only one team can win, and winning you're ecstatic.
Well,
Jerry?
to me, there are two kinds of losses. There's one loss is where the other guy beats you. You're not happy. You can live with that. But what I can't live with is when we beat ourselves. That's what drives me crazy. When we beat ourselves. I never forget the times when we beat ourselves. And the funny thing is, if you pay attention, I think more baseball games are lost than are won. The guy that makes the fewest mistakes wins the game.
Yeah, I used to tell my players, make them beat you. Don't beat yourself. Don't beat yourself. Mental errors will drive you nuts.
So I always try to figure out how I can say something personal at the end of these to say thank you. And Jerry, you scared the hell out of me when we were at the Hall of Fame and you keeled over, and I get to the hotel and you're in the hospital. And I will tell you, and everyone who's listening now, that I never heard a living eulogy, and you would have been so happy to hear what everybody said about you, because you were still alive and you came back the next day and people were just scared to death.
Yeah.
And
Well,
Joe, go ahead, Jerry.
No, I was gonna say I was just dehydrated. That's all. It was really Paul Beeston's fault, because we spent all day sitting out by the lake smoking cigars, and we didn't have anything to drink. And then we went to Jane Clark's party that night, and the first thing I did was grab a glass of wine. And the last thing you're supposed to do when you're dehydrated is to have alcohol. And I started getting dizzy, and that's when I keeled over. So I learned my lesson.
Well, the greatest people in the game that you love so much love you, and you should know that. And Joe, when you had your cancer scare, just so many people were praying for you, and not just those who are Yankee fans. The people who've known you in the game and the people who've had the honor of meeting you care about you, and you're about to celebrate your 80th birthday. And we are so grateful for both of you. You are gentlemen. You are great ambassadors of the sport, and you have been wonderful to me for decades now. And we all appreciate your time. We appreciate your wisdom. We love your stories. And please stay healthy, because we all wish you many, many more years of conversations like this. Everyone, thank you for coming on board. And I apologize for going 4 minutes over. We are done. You guys can disconnect. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Frank.